They called it a movement, a pathway to power, a system of personal growth that could unlock your potential and free you from your emotional weakness. They didn't call it a cult. Not at first. But that's exactly what NXIVM was. Behind the corporate workshops, expensive coaching sessions, and success strategies, there was something far darker hiding in plain sight. Its members were climbing a ladder they didn't know led straight into submission. Physical, psychological, and in some cases, of the erotic kind. By the time the public had caught on, NXIVM had already built a secret society of women branded with the initials of its founder. These weren't just followers, they were victims. Victims of manipulation, coercion, and a belief system engineered to disguise abuse as empowerment. NXIVM didn't scream cult. It didn't wear robes or chant mantras. It wore suits. It used PowerPoint slides and TED Talk lingo. It promised a shortcut to success, all under the banner of personal growth. It weaponized the language of leadership, using modern branding to hide ancient control. In this episode of Cult Classic, we're pulling the mask off of one of the most modern, media-savvy cults in American history. A group that sold self-help and delivered something far more sinister. This is the story of NXIVM, the self-help cult that branded its followers.
Keith Raniere.
Keith Raniere.
Vanguard.
NXIVM. Keith Raniere.
Keith Raniere. Vanguard.
Keith Raniere.
Allison Mack.
NXIVM. Allison Mack.
Keith Raniere.
NXIVM. Keith Raniere. Allison Mack.
NXIVM.
NXIVM.
Allison Mack.
Allison Mack.
The story begins with Keith Raniere, a man with a reputation as a genius, a thinker, and a charismatic leader. Born in Brooklyn in 1960, Raniere claimed he was reading by the age of 2, doing college-level math by 12, and had an IQ that rivaled Einstein. Most of those claims were never verified, of course, but they were repeated often, especially by Raniere himself, naturally. In the 1990s, he ran a pyramid scheme called Consumers Byline. That got shut down by 20 states. After a multi-million-dollar settlement, Raniere didn't disappear, he evolved. In 1998, alongside psychiatric nurse Nancy Salzman, Raniere launched a new business, Executive Success Programs, or ESP. The name sounded corporate, but the goal was spiritual transformation. Or so they said. Attendees were encouraged to confront their limitations, embrace pain as growth, and view Raniere as the central figure in their development. Over time, it became clear that NXIVM, the umbrella organization above ESP, wasn't just teaching success, it was engineering loyalty. The group used colored sashes to indicate rank. White for beginners, orange, green, blue, and up to gold, resembling martial arts belts. Members were assigned coaches. The language felt corporate, but behind it was a structure that rewarded obedience and punished dissent. Workshops could cost thousands. Attendees were encouraged to keep taking more, and when they ran out of money, they were offered, quote, volunteer opportunities, essentially unpaid labor for the cause. As people moved up the ranks, they often became more dependent on NXIVM's belief system and more isolated from outside perspectives. Keith Raniere, or Vanguard, as he insisted members call him, became a mythic figure. His image was carefully controlled. His words were treated as gospel, and within a few years, NXIVM had attracted a growing list of wealthy followers, including Hollywood actors, heiresses, and professionals hungry for something more. And from this point forward, I'm going to refer to them as NX, so I'm not saying 5 letters in a row 500 times. NX thrived in secrecy, but it wasn't a one-man show. Behind Keith was a carefully curated inner circle of loyalists who enforced the system and helped spread its influence. First among them was Nancy Salzman, the co-founder, known within the group as Perfect. Salzman was Raniere's right hand, a trained hypnotist and nurse. She helped design the curriculum that pushed members to confront their limiting beliefs, but often ended in emotional breakdowns disguised as breakthroughs. Her daughters, Lauren and Michelle, would also rise in rank, with Lauren eventually becoming one of the key players in what came next. Then there was the Bronfman sisters, Claire and Sarah, heiresses to the Seagram's liquor fortune. Between them, they poured millions into NX's legal defenses, real estate, and global expansion. Claire, in particular, founded an aggressive campaign of litigation against former members and journalists who criticized the group. Her financial backing became Raniere's legal shield, one that allowed him to silence dissenters through sheer financial pressure. But the most infamous recruit was actress Allison Mack, best known for her role in the show Smallville. Charismatic, ambitious, and idealistic, Mack fell deep into NX belief system and eventually became one of Raniere's most vocal defenders and recruiters. Her fame gave the group a layer of credibility and opened the door to younger, more impressionable women who might never have joined otherwise. What united the inner circle was an absolute belief in Raniere's technology, a term he used for his philosophies on ethics, human behavior, and emotional control. Members were taught that emotions like fear, shame, and jealousy were irrational obstacles to growth, and that true happiness came from obedience and rational self-awareness. But what this did in practice was create a culture where people suppressed their doubts and accepted abuse as enlightenment. Raniere positioned himself as a celibate teacher, but behind the scenes, he was maintaining a rotating group of female followers who were expected to be sexually available to him. Those in his inner circle knew and helped cover it up. Members who questioned anything were handled through interventions, shunning, or emotional breakdown exercises designed to isolate them further. And all of it was framed as self-improvement. The inner circle wasn't just enabling Raniere, they were building a machine, one that would lead to the most secretive and abusive structures within NX, a society within the society. In 2015, something new emerged within NX, a group so secret that most members didn't know it existed. It was called DOS, short for Dominus Obsequious Sororium, which loosely translates from Latin to master over the slave women. Interesting. It was a master slave system. Women are recruited into DOS by members of Raniere's inner circle, including Allison Mack and Lauren Salzman. But they weren't told the full truth. They were told it was a women's empowerment group, one where they would support each other through discipline and accountability. In reality, they were being groomed for complete obedience. The first step was collateral. Before joining, women had to hand over something deeply personal: nude photos, written confessions, or damaging secrets. This collateral would be held in case they broke their vows, a psychological trap to ensure silence and loyalty. Over time, the collateral requirements escalated. What started as confessions evolved into monthly demands for more intimate material. Some women feared that if they stopped complying, their families would be ruined. The blackmail was not hypothetical. It was explicit. Which, I mean, nowadays, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know about anybody else, but we're online. We post stuff online all the time. And some of us make ourselves look stupid online. I do it on a regular basis. Once inside, each woman was assigned a, quote, master and became a, quote, slave. They were expected to obey every command, from text messages at all hours to acts of physical self-discipline, like restrictive diets, cold showers, and sleep deprivation. But the most horrifying ritual was the branding. Women were led to believe they were receiving a small symbol to commemorate their initiation. What they weren't told was that the symbol was actually Raniere's initials, KR, stylized in a way that concealed the truth. The branding was done without anesthesia. Women were held down naked while the cauterizing pen seared flesh. Some wept, some screamed. Allison Mack allegedly stood nearby, encouraging them to remember this pain as empowerment. Even more disturbing was the internal policing. Slaves were instructed to recruit their own slaves and discipline them if they disobeyed. The pyramid spread outward, but all roads led back to Raniere. He was the Grand Master, and none of the women at the bottom of the hierarchy even knew he was involved until it was too late. Women were told it was their idea, that they were choosing this, that submission was a form of freedom. In what world is submission a form of freedom? But underneath it all was coercion, psychological conditioning, and a web of fear that kept victims locked in. For years, DOS operated in secret. Its members swore in silence, convinced that they were part of something powerful. It wasn't until a few brave women escaped and spoke out that the truth began to surface. One of the earliest public cracks in NX's armor came from someone on the inside, Catherine Oxenberg, a former actress and member of Hollywood royalty. Her daughter, India, had joined NX and had been pulled into DOS. Oxenberg's fight to bring her daughter home became a national story. She spoke out, went to the press, and started applying public pressure. But she wasn't alone. Journalist Frank Parlato, a former NX publicist turned whistleblower, began publishing detailed exposés on his blog, The Frank Report. He revealed internal structures, exposed DOS, and named names. Then came the New York Times. Naturally. In 2017, a front-page story by Barry Meier broke the case wide open. Former members went on record, branding, collateral, the master-slave system. For many Americans, this was the first time they'd ever heard of NX. and they were horrified. The FBI got involved soon after. In 2018, Keith was tracked to a luxury villa in Mexico, living with several NX followers. When agents arrived to arrest him, they reportedly found women fighting over who would be taken in his place. That's insane. What? The raid marked the beginning of the end. Soon, indictments came down. Allison Mack, Nancy Salzman, Lauren Salzman, and the Bronfman sisters were all charged with crimes ranging from racketeering to identity theft to forced labor. NX's leaders had spent years portraying themselves as enlightened thinkers, but the public saw something very different. A cult with corporate polish and a deeply abusive culture. As more victims came forward, the full scale of Raniere's manipulation came into focus. He wasn't just a manipulator. He was a man who built a system designed to break people down and call it growth. The trial of Keith Raniere began in May 2019, and it didn't take long for the jury to see through the self-help disguise. Prosecutors laid out the reality of NX and DOS. Witnesses described branding rituals, starvation diets, sexual coercion, and years of psychological abuse. One woman testified that she was locked in a room for nearly 2 years as punishment for disobedience. Raniere was convicted on all counts, including sex trafficking, forced labor, and racketeering. In October 2020, he was sentenced to 120 years in federal prison. Good. Allison Mack pleaded guilty to racketeering and conspiracy charges and was sentenced to 3 years. Nancy received 3.5 years. Claire, despite no direct involvement in DOS, was sentenced to nearly 7 years for financial crimes tied to the cult's operations. India Oxenberg eventually left the group, cut ties with her recruiters, and began speaking publicly about her experience, reclaiming her story after years of silence. NX was disbanded. Its branding, its buildings, its entire ecosystem collapsed under the weight of the truth. But for many, the emotional damage lingers. The scars, literal and psychological, don't fade quickly. NX didn't wear robes, didn't chant mantras, it didn't retreat to the woods or drink poisoned Kool-Aid. It wore suits. It spoke in TED Talk language. It told you that you were broken, and then sold you the tools to fix it. And in the end, it turned personal growth into personal submission. Because cults don't always look like cults. Sometimes they look like leadership workshops. Sometimes they look like coaching sessions. Sometimes they wear a smile and hand you a colored sash. Even worse, sometimes they ask for your trust, one vow, one confession, one brand at a time. In the end, NX didn't create leaders, it created followers willing to be broken and taught to say thank you for it. This has been Cracked Relic, and as always, sources will be down in the description and coming up in the credits. And thank you for watching.